In the heart of Louisiana, where oak trees draped in Spanish moss cast shadows over forgotten histories, there stood a mansion that defied every law of logic and reason. The year was 1847, and what was built there would become one of the most disturbing chapters of American slavery. This is not a ghost story. This is not folklore. This is documented history about a place where human cruelty merged with architectural genius to create something truly horrifying. A mansion where escape was not just difficult, it was impossible, where enslaved people who ran through doors into the night would wake up back in the basement, confused, terrified, questioning their own sanity. Architects who studied the building decades later could not explain what they found. Historians who discovered the hidden diaries wished they never had. Welcome to the true story of Thornwood Mansion, where all doors led back inside. Stay with us, because what you are about to hear will challenge everything you thought you knew about the depths of human evil during one of America's darkest periods. Cornelius Thornwood was not like other plantation owners in Louisiana. Born in 1803 to a wealthy Charleston family, he inherited his father's cotton empire at age 32, but inheritance was never enough for Cornelius. Historical records show he was obsessed with one thing above all else: absolute control. Tax documents from 1846 reveal that Thornwood spent an astonishing $47,000, equivalent to over $1.5 million today, not on expanding his plantation, but on constructing a single residence. His neighbors thought he was mad. They had no idea how right they were. In March of 1847, a man arrived in New Orleans on a ship from Hamburg, Germany. His name was Friedrich von Essen, and he carried with him letters of introduction that were, unusually, all sealed. Local records show von Essen had been an architect in Bavaria, specializing in Baroque design, but there were whispers, documented in letters between European architectural societies, that he had been expelled from his guild for unspecified ethical violations. Thornwood did not care about ethics. He cared about results. The construction began that spring, and from the very first week, something was wrong. Workers, both free laborers and enslaved people forced into the construction, reported strange occurrences. A carpenter named James Woodley wrote to his brother in Mobile, and that letter still exists in the Mobile Historical Society archives. He described how measurements would be correct in the morning, but wrong by afternoon, how corridors seemed to shift position overnight, how he would walk into a room from the east and somehow exit from the west despite walking straight through. Von Essen worked from plans that he never let anyone see completely. He would give each construction team only the section they needed, never the full design. Former overseer Thomas Hightower, who later testified in an 1865 inquiry, stated that von Essen would arrive at night alone and make modifications that no one else was permitted to observe. The mansion rose slowly over 18 months, and its design was unlike anything seen in the American South. It borrowed from Baroque architecture, yes, but it had been modified, twisted, perverted into something else entirely. The exterior was magnificent. White columns, ornate balconies, tall windows that caught the light beautifully, but inside nothing made sense. Staircases that seemed to lead up actually led down. Hallways appeared to be straight but curved imperceptibly. Mirrors were embedded into walls at angles that distorted perception. And there were the doors, dozens of doors, identical doors. Doors that seemed to lead outside but somehow looped back into the mansion itself. By October of 1848, Thornwood Mansion was complete. Cornelius moved in with 43 enslaved people he had purchased specifically for this property. Within a month, the first attempt to escape would reveal the mansion's true purpose. And what happened next would be documented in ways that still make historians uncomfortable to discuss. The first person to try to escape was a young man named Daniel, aged 24, who had been separated from his family in Virginia and sold south. On a November night in 1848, Daniel managed to slip away from the quarters after midnight. He ran. Witnesses who were there, whose testimonies were recorded years later by abolitionists, said he ran toward the front entrance, through the main doors, out into the night. They heard his footsteps fade into the distance. And then, 3 hours later, they heard screaming from the basement. Daniel was there, locked in, hysterical, claiming he had run for miles, had crossed fields, had even waded through a stream. But somehow, he had ended up back inside, in a part of the mansion he swore he had never seen before. Thornwood did not punish Daniel. This is crucial to understanding what was happening. He did not whip him. He did not chain him. He simply smiled and said, "Try again whenever you like." This detail appears in multiple accounts, including one recorded by a visiting merchant who later became an abolitionist. 2 weeks later, a woman named Sarah, 19 years old, attempted escape. Sarah was educated, having been taught to read by a previous owner's daughter. Her account, written down in 1866 when she gave testimony to the Freedmen's Bureau, is chilling in its precision. She described leaving through the kitchen door at dawn, running in a straight line toward where she knew the road was, running until her lungs burned, running until the sun was fully up. She remembers passing the same large oak tree, then passing it again, then again. She thought she was going mad. When she finally collapsed from exhaustion, she found herself in the mansion's rose garden, which was enclosed by walls on all 4 sides. She had never entered through any gate. She was simply there. What makes your opinion matter? Because these were real people, real human beings who experienced psychological torture that we can barely comprehend. Leave a comment below telling us what you think about what you have heard so far. Do you believe architecture can be weaponized this way? An abolitionist named Marcus Bentley, disguised as an agricultural equipment salesman, visited Thornwood Mansion in January of 1849. His journal, preserved at the Library of Congress, documents his secret investigation. He was horrified by what he found. Bentley was an educated man, familiar with architecture and engineering, and he noticed things others had missed. The mirrors were not decorative. They were positioned at exact angles to create visual loops, making someone think they were moving forward when they were actually being redirected. The hallways had subtle curves, so gradual that the human eye could not detect them, causing people to walk in circles while believing they traveled in straight lines. But the mirrors and curves were only part of it. Bentley discovered something else. There were marks on the interior walls, scratch marks, dozens of them. Some were high up, suggesting someone had climbed, desperate to find a way out. Some were low, as if someone had collapsed and clawed at the baseboards. In his journal, Bentley wrote, "I have seen the devil's architecture, and it wears the face of genius, married to absolute evil." Between 1848 and 1852, there were 47 documented escape attempts from Thornwood Mansion. 47 attempts, 0 successes. Each person who tried found themselves back inside, sometimes in minutes, sometimes in hours, but always back inside. The psychological impact was devastating. People stopped trying. They stopped hoping. And that, as we now understand, was exactly what Cornelius Thornwood wanted. For those of you still watching, thank you. Thank you for bearing witness to this difficult history. Thank you for not looking away. What comes next is even more disturbing, but it is important. The best, if we can call it that, is still to come. In 1923, 75 years after the mansion's construction, a property developer named Harold Chen purchased the abandoned Thornwood estate with plans to demolish it and build a hotel. During preliminary work, his crew discovered a basement room that had been sealed behind a false wall. Inside that room were 12 leather-bound journals, a stack of architectural drawings, and a locked metal box. What they contained would rewrite everything we thought we knew about Thornwood Mansion. The journals were Cornelius Thornwood's personal diaries, written in his own hand, dated from 1846 to 1862. They were not the rambling writings of a madman. They were detailed, methodical, scientific in their approach. Thornwood had documented everything. He called it his grand experiment in spatial subjugation. He wrote about his theory that control over enslaved people could be perfected not through violence, which he called crude and inefficient, but through psychological manipulation using architecture and environmental design. The architectural drawings showed the full scope of von Essen's genius and depravity. The mansion was designed as a three-dimensional labyrinth. Corridors that appeared to lead outside actually curved back into the interior through gradual, imperceptible angles. Doors that seemed to open to freedom were actually connected to a network of passages that redirected people back inside. Some doors were false entirely, opening onto brick walls that had been painted to look like distant landscapes, visible only in darkness or confusion. But it was worse than that. Much worse. In the metal box were von Essen's personal notes, written in German, which were translated by a linguistics professor from Tulane University in 1924. These notes revealed the use of what von Essen called perceptual warfare. The mansion had been fitted with copper tubes running through the walls, designed to carry sound from one area to another, creating auditory illusions. A person running through the East Wing would hear birds and wind sounds piped in from outside, convincing them they had escaped, when in fact they were still deep inside the structure. There was more. Von Essen had designed a ventilation system, highly advanced for its time, that allowed for the controlled burning of certain substances in the lower levels. Historical analysis of residue found in these chambers in 1924 showed traces of plants native to Louisiana that have mild hallucinogenic properties when burned. The smoke was subtle, not enough to cause obvious intoxication, but enough to cause disorientation, confusion, and suggestibility. People were being drugged without knowing it. Thornwood's diary entries from 1850 to 1852 detail his observations with cold, clinical precision. He noted how long it took for each person to give up hope after a failed escape attempt. He recorded their psychological deterioration. He wrote about how the uncertainty, the inability to trust one's own senses, was more effective than chains at preventing escape. In one entry, dated April 3, 1851, he wrote, "Subject number 29 attempted egress via the north parlor door at approximately 2 in the morning. Returned to starting point within 43 minutes, exhibiting severe disorientation and emotional distress. No physical restraint was necessary. The mind, once convinced of its own powerlessness, creates its own prison." The numbers he kept were horrifying in their bureaucratic coldness. 47 escape attempts, 0 successes, average time before return to the mansion 2 hours and 16 minutes, average time before subject ceased all escape attempts, 11 days. Thornwood was not running a plantation, he was running a laboratory of human despair. And here is what perhaps disturbs historians most. Thornwood was not alone in this knowledge. Letters found in the same sealed room show correspondence with at least 6 other plantation owners in Louisiana, Mississippi, and Alabama, all expressing interest in his methods. There were plans, never fully realized due to the onset of the Civil War, to expand this architectural approach to other locations. The Thornwood Mansion was intended to be a prototype. Evil, history teaches us, eventually consumes itself. Cornelius Thornwood's fate is as disturbing as the mansion he created. On March 7, 1862, with the Civil War raging and Union forces advancing through Louisiana, something happened inside Thornwood Mansion that has never been fully explained. A neighboring plantation owner, William Sutter, wrote in a letter to his cousin that he heard screaming coming from the Thornwood property, not the screams of enslaved people, which shamefully would not have alarmed him. These were different. A man's voice, screaming for help, screaming in terror, screaming that he could not find the way out. The screaming continued for 3 days. By the time Sutter and 2 other men worked up the courage to investigate, the mansion was silent. They found the front door wide open. Inside, they found chaos, furniture overturned, mirrors shattered, scratch marks on walls, fresh ones, different from the old marks. And in the central hallway, they found Cornelius Thornwood. He was 48 years old. He was dead. His hands were bloody from clawing at the walls. His face was frozen in an expression of absolute terror. And the strange thing, the thing that Sutter noted in his letter and that appears in the coroner's brief report, was that Thornwood was found just 15 feet from the main entrance. 15 feet from freedom. But he had died trying to find the way out of his own house. The official cause of death was listed as heart failure. But Sutter's letter suggests something else. He wrote, "It was as if Cornelius had become lost in his own creation, as if the mansion that he built to trap others had turned on its master. We found him facing a mirror, and I wonder if in his final moments he saw what they saw, felt what they felt, knew what they knew. The enslaved people who had been held at Thornwood were gone. In the chaos of the Civil War, they had fled, and this time they succeeded. Some made it to Union lines. Some disappeared into history. A few, decades later, shared their stories with historians and their descendants. But none of them ever returned to Louisiana. After Thornwood's death, the mansion stood empty. Attempts to sell it failed. People in the area wanted nothing to do with it. There were stories, reported in the New Orleans Daily Picayune in 1873, of locals hearing sounds from the empty mansion. Footsteps, crying, voices calling for help. Whether these were genuine paranormal occurrences or simply the mansion's acoustic design continuing to play tricks, no one could say for certain. In 1891, a lumber company purchased the property with plans to demolish the mansion and harvest the wood. The work began on a Monday morning in June. By Wednesday afternoon, the entire crew had quit. The foreman, a man named Patrick Donnelly, told a reporter that the building fought back. Walls that should have been easy to tear down proved impossibly resistant. Workers reported feeling disoriented, getting lost in sections of the mansion they had just mapped out hours before. One man fell through a floor that seemed solid moments earlier. Another claimed he entered a room from the north and exited from the south despite walking straight ahead. Donnelly said he had demolished dozens of buildings in his career, but Thornwood Mansion was different. "It does not want to come down," he said. The demolition was abandoned, and so the mansion stood, decaying slowly, becoming overgrown with vines and vegetation, but never quite disappearing. It stood as a monument, though no one wanted to call it that. It stood as a reminder of what had happened there, of what human beings are capable of doing to one another when they view others as less than human. Today, if you drive down Route 43 in St. Bernard Parish, Louisiana, about 30 miles southeast of New Orleans, you will see a historical marker. It is simple, bronze, weather-worn. It reads, "Thornwood Mansion, built 1847, site of documented human rights abuses during the slavery era, preserved as a testament to resilience and remembrance. The mansion still stands." In 1978, after years of debate, it was granted historic landmark status, not to honor what happened there, but to ensure that what happened there would never be forgotten. The decision was controversial. Some argued it should be destroyed, that it was a monument to evil. Others, particularly descendants of those who were enslaved there, argued that erasing it would erase their ancestors' suffering. In the end, preservation won, but with a condition. The mansion would become an educational site, a place where the truth would be told. In the decades since, Thornwood Mansion has been studied extensively. Architecture professors from universities across the country have examined its design. A team from MIT in 2007 spent 6 months mapping the interior using laser scanning technology. Their report confirmed what the diaries had claimed. The mansion was designed with mathematical precision to create disorientation. The angles of the corridors, the placement of the mirrors, the acoustic properties of the walls, all of it was intentional. One researcher called it the most sophisticated psychological warfare architecture of the 19th century. But it is not just academics who come to Thornwood. Descendants come. In 2003, a memorial was erected on the grounds, funded by a coalition of historical societies and advocacy groups. It lists the names of 43 people who are known to have been enslaved at Thornwood Mansion. 43 names recovered from bills of sale, tax records and testimony. There were others, certainly, whose names are lost to history, but these 43 are remembered. Among those descendants is a woman named Patricia Moreau, whose great-great-great-grandmother was Sarah, the young woman who tried to escape and found herself back in the Rose Garden. Patricia has become a volunteer guide at the site. In interviews, she explains why she does this difficult work. She says, "My ancestor survived something that was designed to break her spirit. She survived, and she eventually made it to freedom, and she built a life. I am here because she refused to let that mansion win. When I tell her story, when I tell all their stories, that mansion does not win." The paranormal investigation shows that occasionally film at Thornwood have recorded unusual phenomena. Voices, shadows, temperature changes. Whether these are evidence of something supernatural or simply the mansion's design still creating effects is a matter of belief. But what is not a matter of belief is this. Thornwood Mansion stands as proof of how architecture, how the physical spaces we create, can be used as tools of oppression. It reminds us that control does not always come through obvious violence. Sometimes it comes through subtlety, through the manipulation of perception, through making people question their own reality. In recent years, Thornwood Mansion has been included in curricula at schools across Louisiana and beyond. Students visit. They walk through the corridors, though many of the most dangerous sections are blocked off for safety. They see the mirrors, the doors that lead nowhere, the staircases that deceive. They read the diaries or excerpts from them. They learn the names of the people who suffered there, and hopefully they learn to recognize oppression in all its forms, obvious and subtle. The mansion that was built to ensure no one could escape has become, in a sense, a place that no one can ignore. Its story has escaped, spreading through books, documentaries, academic papers, and now through this account. The truth has gotten out in a way that Cornelius Thornwood never could have imagined. And perhaps that is the final irony. He built a prison from which there was no escape, but he could not imprison the truth. He could not imprison the memory. He could not imprison the resilience of the human spirit. The story of Thornwood Mansion is not easy to hear. It is not meant to be. It is a story about the depths of human cruelty during one of the darkest chapters of American history. It is about how intelligence and creativity, which should serve humanity, can be twisted to cause suffering. But it is also a story about survival, about the people who endured the unendurable and whose descendants carry their legacy forward with dignity and strength. What do you think about this history? How do we honor the memory of those who suffered while ensuring we learn from what happened? Your opinion matters. Share your thoughts in the comments below. This history belongs to all of us, and we all have a responsibility to remember it truthfully. If this story impacted you, if it made you think, if it made you feel something, please subscribe to this channel. History like this needs to be told, and your subscription helps us continue this important work. And please, watch the next recommended video where we uncover another buried truth, another story that needs to be heard. Thank you for staying with us through this difficult journey. Thank you for not looking away. Thank you for bearing witness.